Let me ask you, what if everything you've been told about saving, working hard, and retiring at 65 actually was designed to keep you stuck? And what would change if your money worked harder than you did? Man, I wish I knew that 20 years ago. And if you've ever felt like you're on this financial treadmill, then earning more but still stuck in the time for money trap, then this episode I think is going to be very good for you. It's going to challenge everything that you thought that you knew about money. 'Cause I know it's doing that for me already. So let's take a moment, just hit like and subscribe for this episode and share it because there's going to be someone out there who's going to need to hear a better way to manage their finances. And so it's this kind of support that helps us really grow the podcast and get other people out here listening to the show. And so they can lead lives of freedom and purpose. And so with that, let's get on with today's episode.
The average man today is sleepwalking through life, many never reaching their true potential, let alone ever crossing the finish line to living a purposeful life. Yet, the hunger still exists, albeit buried amidst his cluttered mind, misguided beliefs, and values that no longer serve him. It's time to align yourself for greatness. It's time to become a revolutionary man. Stay strong, my brother.
Welcome back to the show, my friends. And before we broke here, there was an opportunity for me to ask you a couple of questions to consider whether you thought your current financial strategy is actually keeping you stuck. And so we've been told this hard work and saving money and that someday maybe we're going to retire comfortably. But what if that's not freedom? What if there's just another way, one that's going to allow us to build wealth today and now so we can reclaim our time and actually design a life of purpose and with impact? And so that's exactly what today's guest has done in his life. And Bronson Hill is the founder of Bronson Equity and a general partner with over 2,500 multifamily units worth more than $250 million. He's raised over $45 million in real estate and private equity deals. And he's the host of the Mailbox Money Show. And he's also the author of the best-selling book, Fire Yourself, Place Your Working Income with Passive Income in 3 years or less. And so he's also really passionate advocate for financial freedom, which we're going to talk a lot about today, mindset transformation. I need to figure that out as well. And really ending the modern day slavery that we've been brought up to believe. And so welcome to the show today, Bronson. How are things, my friend?
Hey, Elaine, really happy to be here, man. I'm doing well. Happy to be here, brother.
Right on. Fun to have you on the show. It's been a while since we've talked about this topic. And so I'm really excited to get into it and dive into the meat and potatoes, so to speak. But before we get totally in there, we're going to talk a little bit about your journey, Bronson. And your journey started really with medical sales. And what was that moment that you finally realized that you needed to break out of this time for money model that really set you on the course that you're doing today?
So I was a well-paid medical sales professional making over $200,000 a year. And I had some sense of financial freedom, but I just didn't have time freedom. And I think for a lot of people that say they want financial freedom, it actually really means time freedom. And in the US, I'm sure in Canada as well, a lot of us work too much. We're working too many hours, too many days. A lot of times we don't. Even if you get paid a lot of money, a lot of times it's a time for money trade. So you can't take the time off. So I had a couple of physicians that I was working with that were making $2 million a year each, which is a lot of money. But they were working 60 to 80 hours a week every week. And I just thought, this doesn't feel like freedom to me. This doesn't feel like a life that I really want to emulate. And I started learning about real estate. I had been doing some real estate investing over the years, but I made a decision, Elaine. I really at one point just said, you know what? In 3 years, I want to not be doing this anymore. I want to be like on my own. I want to be traveling more. I want to be writing. I write music. I write books. I just doing things that are much more fulfilling and meaningful to me. And with money, you can always make more money. You just can't make more time. And I learned about not just the investing I was doing, which was I scaled up some single family investing and then realized that was just much slower than how I wanted to get there. Syndication is just a fancy word for how we pool funds together to go after bigger apartment buildings or buying businesses or doing oil and gas deals or other things. And I learned about it, started raising capital for deals, started a meetup, a local real estate meetup in Pasadena, California, where I live. And then just over time, found partners, found investors, and now it's close to $50 million we've raised. So it's gone fast and it's been quite a journey. It's not always been easy, but it's definitely been a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds like it's just been a rocket ship, really, from moving from the traditional pay for money versus doing what you're doing now and really investing and setting up a foundation for this passive income. And so you talked, just to mention there as well, that really you're also passionate about having purpose and meaning. And so when we talked earlier about financial freedom, what does that allow you to do to pursue what you couldn't do before? And maybe that's for others as well.
Yeah, for me, last year in 2024, I was able to travel 6 times internationally. So I went to Nepal and India. I did the base camp of Mount Everest. I did a hike there with some friends, went to Portugal, went to Ireland, a couple times to Mexico. And I feel like there's something about travel that just is a reset for me. So it helps me to think differently. And it's not just, I don't want to just travel all the time, but I want to travel enough that allows me to get creative ideas and refresh. A lot of times my creative ideas come when I'm not in the office as someone out and about somewhere. I was actually on a trip a few years ago to going to Patagonia, Chile, and that's where I wrote the outline of my book, Fire Yourself, which has now become an Amazon #1 real estate category bestseller. And I think just being able to create, I think that at the end of the day, life is short. And as I went, this was 7, 8 years ago, went through a divorce, unfortunately, and I approached 40 years old. I'm 44 now. But just realize that every year goes faster, and purpose is so important. So what am I actually here to do? So I had a discovery process that, to me, being a great dad is important. I have amazing 12-year-old daughter. I want to create, want to write. I also want to one of my big, hairy, audacious goals is to end modern day human slavery in the world. There's 20 to 40 million human slaves today. It gets where there's more than there's ever been in the history of the world. I believe it will get worse unless we take drastic action. And I think there are causes that are worth living and dying for. And for me, that's it. So I think that having purpose in what you do, developing a life of freedom for me so that I can pursue helping other people to become set free from, like you said, financial bondage. And also, I think in the US, there's a study that showed around 70% or 75% of people, they don't like their job or they're not fulfilled in their work. And that's a real tragedy, right? What if we could do things that we have the choice? Do we want to go to work? Do we not? You may say, my book is called Fire Yourself. Maybe you don't want to fire yourself from your job yet, but what if, God forbid, you had a health issue or something happened to a family member? You just even having the freedom that, a boss wasn't good to you or a business thing didn't work out, that you'd be okay. And I think that's a skill set of how do you start developing that passive income so that you have those choices.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think it is true that if we go through life without real meaning and purpose, we're going to definitely struggle. And so what ends up by happening is we have Groundhog Day. And then Groundhog Day just never seems to ever produce anything. And I want to dive in a little bit deeper about this. And you started talking about your book, Fire Yourself. And I think it's important for us to really understand what you totally mean by that. You just started saying they don't necessarily need to quit your job, but it does mean you have to have a different mindset. Because the guys that I talk to a lot in my men's work and then having guests on the show, we struggle with this idea as men that we need to be that person that's the provider. But we think of it as that back to that day job, that grind it out every day. But you have a different take on it. And let's dive into that.
Yeah, so it's interesting. This all for me started, I studied Warren Buffett. I think he's our generation's most successful investor and very quotable, lots of things. And he has this quote, and it's in the first part of my book, just before I even start the book. It says, "Unless you learn how to make money while you sleep, you'll work until you die." And if you really think about that, make money while you sleep. How do you make money while you sleep? Most of the things I do or would do for work, I have to be actually working and doing. What is it that if my money itself, my dollar bills, would get their coat on and leave the house and go actually work hard for me when I'm doing something totally different? That's really what passive income is about. And that's a skill set. That's something that it's something discovered, but it's something that's also learned. And the challenge, I used to be a registered investment advisor in the US. Now I call myself a recovering investment advisor, same initials RIA, but recovering. And so a lot of people don't realize that with Wall Street, the ways they've set things up, people don't become wealthy through those methods. They can sometimes manage the wealth and not lose it, but they don't become wealthy through it. You have to do things differently. And so this is where I'm going to get back into history. After 1929, many years ago, of course, we had the big crash here. Stock market went down 89% over the next few years. 89%. You just think of where we're at. I think in the US, we're a little over 40,000 for the major Dow Jones index. And so if it went down to 4,000 or something, it was sat there. It didn't come back to where it was for 25 years. And that doesn't even include inflation. It was just there was a time in there where people would say, oh my gosh, why in the world would you ever buy stocks? Or why would you buy stocks, bonds, real estate? And I think thinking differently, we call them real assets. They're called alternative assets as well, but real estate or other real assets like businesses or oil and gas or other things that actually generate, I think over long term, they historically perform way better. They're about 2 to 1, at least in the US, as far as the performance historically. And then I just think they provide a lot more safety than financialized products that we're taught to put our money into through a lot of these Wall Street firms. Is really spend billions and billions of dollars every year to educate you that this is a safe and secure way to do, even though they're incredibly volatile. We can get into kind of what passive investing really is. There's a lot of there's a lot of misconceptions around passive investing, but happy to go wherever you want to go with it, Elaine.
Yeah, I definitely want to touch on a little bit of that because I think of the guy when I have my demographic will be as early as mid 20s to guys that are closer to retirement and into the 60s. But I'm thinking of regardless where you're at, but if you're just a young guy, you've got family, maybe you got the mortgage, you're just getting started and you're still trading time for money and you hear this idea of passive income. So how does somebody just get started with just to get their foot in the door with some stuff and get at least start to understand and learn and with where they're at in life.
Yeah, so I think there's really two groups of people I want to address here that there are people that have more money than they have time. So if you have a net worth at least over $1 million US, or maybe you have a good job or you're retired or something, maybe it makes sense to be a passive investor, right? To invest in deals that we do, other groups do deals, and basically your money will grow without taking up more of your time. That's really who passive investing is best for. When I started, I didn't have a lot of money, right? I had a good job, but I didn't have a lot of savings. And I basically started to find a way to help people a little more active. I would raise money. I would raise capital. I'd find people with money problems, not that they didn't have money, but they had money and they needed to know how to invest it, right? And they didn't like the stock market and things like that. So there are ways to do it both actively and passively. I think the best way to learn just in general is to get around other people that are investors, right? So if I want to be an investor, I've got to get around people. So well, there's a lot of great ideas. You can watch a lot of great YouTube videos. This is a great show. I have a podcast called The Mailbox Money Show. We talk about, and there's a lot of educational things we talk about around investing as well, which is great. But until you get in the room with somebody who is an investor, who's been doing it for 10 years, who says, hey, I'm willing to share with you. I worked with these guys. This group is awesome. I would totally invest with them again. And these guys over here, I would never invest with them again for these reasons. So that's where that's a transformational relationship, right? So most people in finance, and even myself included in this, want to sell you something, right? We love our deals. It's not even a bad intent. We want everybody to do our stuff. But somebody else who's not offering deals, but they're just an investor just like you, they're going to be the best person to talk to because they don't have a dog in the fight. They're just saying, hey, I want to share information. I want to know what you've done. I want to share what I've done. And you meet somebody who's been doing it for a long time and it normalizes it. So I think that's really the biggest thing is getting in rooms with people that are investors and just asking questions. And then something that sounds weird, how could I give money or send money to somebody I've never met? So, oh, these guys have done it and it's turned out well. And here's how it's been. I think it's really valuable. So I think that's probably the biggest thing.
Yeah, it makes total sense to me. And in today's environment, there's lots of forums and other places where you can start to get some information, reaching out to local chambers of commerce, different ways where you can find these investors. I think it's a matter of doing a little bit of research. And I think there's opportunity for us to do that. But the other part I think you're really starting to touch on is your upcoming book, Rich Brain. And because really what we're starting to dive into here is really that link between how we think and our relationship to wealth. And so let's talk a little bit about your upcoming book and what you're trying to accomplish with that one.
Yeah. So Rich Brain, the book is Rich Brain, How the Wealthy Change Their Brain to Change Their Bank Account. I actually wrote the book and then I realized I was trying to do too much. And it's basically really focused around the mindset around what does it take to be wealthy. Now, this is something I discovered is that most people, at least in our culture, they believe they're either born with money or you're not. There's kind of this class warfare. There's the haves nots and whatnot. But the truth is actually the opposite. Fidelity Investments did a 2019 study and they found that 86% of millionaires were self-made, right? 86%. So that means almost 9 out of 10 people, they didn't inherit it. They figured out a way to become wealthy. And that should be very encouraging for me who's not wealthy, right? That I came from a very middle-class home and these are learnable, teachable skills, mindsets, habits. And so that was really encouraging. And then what I really learned is there's some concepts around it that I found really fascinating, but just the fact that you can learn how to become wealthy and you can actually take specific actions and have different mindsets around that. Again, it sounds weird to do affirmations. It sounds weird to have written goals, except the weird people that do these things are often very wealthy. Most people that are worth over $10 million, they have some sort of mindset practice they do on a daily basis or a weekly basis. It's surprising until you see the results.
That makes so much sense. It talks about just making a note there, mindset practice. I think we forget that regardless of where we are in our wealth journey, whether we have it or we on the path or we don't have any, is that you talked about mindset practices. Whatever practices we're having is what the outcome that we're currently delivering. So why not do something weird and have a practice and maybe it includes a mantra meditation,
Yes.
whatever that piece looks like for you, to change the pattern that we're living in. And I think that's such a great opportunity with your book coming out to help us really understand that it is a shift in how in our relationship with money and our mindset and how we've been raised to believe that. And this leads me to, I talked to you about in the intro, you raised like over $45 million now. You've spoken to close to 2,500 high net worth individuals. So you must have learned a few other habits and beliefs that are really separating them from the rest of us. And we touched a little bit on a mindset shift. What else is happening?
Yeah, there's this concept I discovered called, I never really heard anybody talk about this, but I call it wealth worthiness. And what it has to do with is a lot of times somebody who makes $100,000 a year will just find a way to make $100,000 a year. There's kind of this cap, and it's an internal cap. Somebody makes $1 million a year, it's similar. They'll find a way to make $1 million. There's this idea of we get what we expect or what we feel we're worthy of. It's been shown that we self-sabotage. About 90% of us have self-sabotaging habits, negative self-talk, procrastination. We do different things, not just in wealth, but in different areas. And you can also see this in relationships. So if I'm a single guy, I show up to a party at a friend's house, I see a beautiful woman there, and I go over to talk to her, and my self-talk is, she's not going to like me, I'm not good looking, I have nothing to offer. How do you think that conversation is going to go? It's probably not going to go very well. And even if it's probably not going to happen, but if it does, it's not going to go well. And so it's the same when it comes to real estate deals and other types of investing projects as well, is that we can basically have this sense of worthiness around those things. And an example of this is I actually had a business deal that was approached me last summer, and I passed by it, but because I've been doing some work in this space, I was able to think about it later. I'm like, no, I think that actually could work for us. Now it's about 5 times the size of our current business. And I've raised $50 million. It's a big deal. And so I basically was able to come back and say, okay, I think this actually could work. We were able to work it out. We raised some money for it. Now, unfortunately, with the tariffs with China, with some of the stuff, we ended up not closing on the deal, at least to this point. But I still look at it like a win, Elaine, because I was able to receive that. I was able to actually say, so I think these things that we look at when it comes to worthiness are very important. Our self-talk is very important. The way that we look at kind of our goals and our life and those kind of things. So I think just visualizing ourselves and how we see ourselves is very important.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think it is important. You mentioned tariffs, and we're in Canada here. So of course we just went through our federal election, and the big thing was we needed to vote somebody in who was going to fight big bad Trump. And in the end, it really has nothing to do with Trump. It has to do with our mindset and how we've lived our lives here as Canadians, because we have such this great superpower that's next door to us. And so it shows up in our behaviors and how we choose to live our lives. And so same thing with your example, talking about if you would have been if your mindset would have been at where you started 20 years ago, then versus where you are today, that deal wouldn't have even come close to being even looked at, because it is a different type of relationship. And I think it's so important that we need to shift our beliefs about what is actually true versus what we think is actually happening. And that gets into things like really understanding how to utilize, you mentioned tariffs, but inflation's also a big piece on a lot of people's minds and how to deal with it. But you wrote some really powerful stuff on how we can use inflation to our advantage instead of being crushed by it. And let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I have a guide I wrote on about inflation, and I think how we think about ourselves. Even I appreciate sharing that about the Canadian narrative as well, because we all have things that are around ourselves. Somebody said something to us while we were a kid. Sorry, I have a new puppy, and it's barking in the background. I don't know if you can hear it, but that's what that little barky sound in the background is. But anyway, when it comes to specifically inflation, I think a lot of us, no matter where you live, there's pain at the pump, there's pain in the grocery store. We see it. And there is a way, though, to be on the other side of the equation, that as costs go up, you benefit, right? And so you do that in real estate, you do that using debt. Real assets, there's just precious metals and other things. And so if you have a free guide for your audience at the end, I'm happy to give out that I wrote in regards to that, just some unique strategies. Because the amazing thing is, if you have debt, let's say you have a house, and you can't find this house anywhere, but just for example, $100,000 house, and you put 20% down and it appreciates by 20%, your money hasn't increased by 20%. Your equity has actually increased by 100%, right? Because you only put $20,000 down and now you got $40,000 in equity. So it's doubled, right? So when you use leverage, that's one way to use inflation to your advantage. And we know over the long term, rents, real estate, all this stuff is going to continue to cost more as countries create more currency. It's just where we're headed.
Yeah, absolutely. And then that kind of leads into this idea of, again, I'm I was 15, just turned 59 here in April. And so I was raised through a generation where my parents were savers. I had to save money, save and save. And so that was the idea, because that's how you're going to
Right.
get ahead. But that's a painfully long and unsuccessful process for many of us, because you just can't save yourself to wealth. And instead, you talked a little bit there, touched on this idea of using debt, good debt, in order to really help propel your stuff. So let's talk a little bit about how you step into that. You mentioned real estate. There's probably other ways that we can do that make sense for our own situation, where then maybe we can reach out to gentlemen such as yourself to help us guide us on that process.
Yeah, so I think like I said, any of it is just getting around people that can really guide you. You have other people around that have been more experienced than you. They can walk you through that process. And again, I think where people really take on more risk is because they don't know what they're doing. So a lot of us when we're starting, we don't know what we're doing, right? So we need people to help us. So that's where having friends, having mentors, having people in our life that we can go to, great shows like this, shows like mine, just they can continue to have people they can bounce things off of, or at least ideas they can continue to learn. So I think that for a good first step for a lot of people is to get to a local meetup, get to a conference, and meet other investors and just say, hey, what are some deals you're doing? What do you like? And I would say my book, Fire Yourself, I talk about this where it's like, maybe you give yourself a timeline. You say over the next 60 or 90 days, I'm going to look at 5 or 10 different deals and I'm going to choose one and I'm going to invest, right? So my guess is you'll find something that will work. It will probably turn out okay, but again, you'll learn. And so a lot of times the goal is to really take the process, be able to learn it, take it apart, understand why you like this deal. One question I really like to ask when I'm analyzing a deal is, what do I think the biggest risk in this investment is, no matter what the asset is, right? Whether it's oil and gas, whether it's doing car washes or it's buying real estate. And there's always risk. If you don't see the risk in a deal, then you haven't really looked at it enough, right? So you got to ask more questions and whatever. And then I'll ask the sponsor, I'll say, I won't tell them what I think it is, but I'll say, what do you think the biggest risk of this is? And it usually is something different than what I would have thought. I was like, oh, I hadn't really thought of that, whatever. And then you'll think, okay, is this something I want to do? So I think, again, you're never going to do it perfectly. You're going to make mistakes. You'll have deals that hopefully go really well. You have deals that go about as planned. You have deals that don't go well. And so I think with all that, there's a learning process. And another Warren Buffett quote is, the best investment you make is in yourself, right? Is that it's all learning, it's all growth. And it's a little harder when you're 85 years old and you need the money to live on, whatever. It's a little harder to learn that later on, but you can still do it. And it's just being a little more conservative. But it's just, no matter what age you are, no matter what happens, just say, hey, this is all learning. This is all investing in myself.
Yeah. And of everything that we've been speaking about today, it's really about getting in the game. You can read as many books as you want. You can attend a few seminars. That's another way to do it. You can sit in and join some mentorship group. It's another way to do it. But ultimately, you got to decide whether you're going to be in the game. And getting in the game means starting and doing something. And I'm sure through the course of your learning, Bronson, you've had a few mentors and you're mentoring some people right now. And I know you've mentioned Warren a couple of times, but what would you say has been the best piece of advice you've been given, and how is it still serving you today?
I think the best piece of advice, I have a mentor that helped me when I was starting, named Christina Suter, and she's around. She has a podcast and does stuff as well. But she said there's 2 things that really help you in your investing journey. One is networking and the other is education. And so it goes with this quote that was said by John Wooden, is attributed to him. It said, you'll be the same person 5 years from now, except for the books you read and the people that you meet. So what is that? So that's networking and education, right? It may not be a book. It could be a podcast like this. It could be a YouTube video. It could be something else. But getting to conferences, getting to meetups, meeting new people, networking. And networking is not just simply, hey, shaking hands and passing business cards. It's like really listening to somebody, figuring out what they need and seeing, can I help this person? Can we partner together? Is there someone in the room right now that I could introduce them to? Can I text somebody or call somebody right now and introduce them to them? Or is there a book or resource that I can share with them that can help them? And so we really appreciate when people want to help us. So I think if we show up in a room that's an investor or any room and just say, hey, how can I help people that are here? It really can open up a lot of doors for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree with that idea. Bronson, before we wrap up today, I know there's one message you'd share with, if you could share just one message, I should say, with a listener who maybe he's sitting there and he's listening to this and he knows he's meant for more, but he's just stuck. He's trading dollars for hours. And what would that message be for him?
Yeah, I would say really just make a goal for yourself, even if it sounds unreasonable. I said, okay, in 3 years, I don't want to be doing this job anymore. And I didn't quite know how I was going to do it, but I said, that's my goal. I want to get out of this job. Because this is a grind. And so if you find that, hey man, I'm grinding, or hey, if something happened to me or something happened to my spouse or I would not be able to take the time off. I'm really not financially free. it's out there. We've just got to be able to go meet the people, read the books, make the connections. And like you said, take the action, right? We get all this knowledge and meet all these people and we don't do anything. But if we actually start making offers every week, or we start investing in deals, like you said, we get in the game. And I'm sure this show is about nothing changes until you take action, right? So it's the people that actually take action and figure out as they're doing it, they figure out where they want to go, and they'll be much more likely to get where they want to go.
Amen, brother. Totally agree with that. I just want to say thank you so much, Bronson, for spending time with us today and really sharing your wisdom on how we can start to look at creating some passive income by first transforming our mindset, and then that'll ultimately lead us to our financial purpose. And while this has given us some great, powerful framework, if we really want to move from burnout to freedom, we need to take a little bit more action. So if men want to connect with you and learn more about your work, what would be the best way for them to get hold of you?
Yeah, happy to connect with anybody and any of these topics, personal development, real estate, investing. You mentioned how to use inflation to your advantage. So I've got this color. It's like a 30-page ebook, and you can get that for free if you text the word inflation to the number 33777. So you text the word inflation to 33777. We'll send that to you, and that'll it'll get you on our list, and you can hear about our future offerings and things we're doing as well. But great to connect. Look forward to connecting with anybody from your audience that would want to reach out.
Right on. I'll make sure that is in the show notes today, as well as anywhere else that you are on the internet and social media, so folks can get a hold of you. This one, as we get ready to wrap up today's episode, I just want to leave you with one other thing. If you are truly free and not just busy, then you're ready to take off of this trading time for money journey, then you can start to build a life of freedom and some impact and purpose. And so I want you to take some action today. Go visit us at members.theawakenedman.net and take our free integrity challenge. It's where financial power meets inner clarity, and it's an opportunity to live with intention, lead with integrity, and you can get started today. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today, Bronson. I truly enjoyed our conversation.
Thanks, Elaine.
Thank you for listening to the Revolutionary Man podcast. Are you ready to own your destiny? To become more the man you are destined to be? Join the brotherhood that is the Awakened Man at theawakenedman.net and start forging a new destiny today.